This year, 2012, is an election year, a presidential election year, and today, September 22nd, 2012, is just over 6 weeks from the election day of November 6th. A lot of speculation is going on about who will be elected this year. Will it be President Barack Obama for a second term? Or will it be the challenger, former Governor Mitt Romney? As a teacher of algebra, pre-calculus, and calculus, I am always on the lookout to point out whenever possible what a lot of people don't know or forget. And that is that algebra has a lot of real-world practical uses in order to make decisions and predictions. I, like most voters, have a preference for one of these candidates. But the main purpose of the video is to show how, using math and algebra, we can use analytical skills to make predictions. So the tone of this presentation is not to favor either candidate, but to analyze the current polling data, specifically the national polls, to make a prediction of who will be inaugurated this coming January. Accordingly, I will do my best to check my bias at the door in this analysis, and I hope that viewers will see that this is an unbiased analysis. As of today, September 22nd, on the political website realclearpolitics.com, the 8 most recent nationwide polls are shown, and a weighted average of these 8 polls show that their average shows a 3.3% advantage for President Obama. All these polls have some margin of error just due to limitations of statistics, of their accuracy, usually somewhere around 3 or 4%. So based on 3 or 4% for each candidate, each one of these polls, including the last one listed of Pew Research showing an 8-point advantage for President Obama, would fall within the poll's margin of error. In other words, even though most of these polls favor President Obama, no single poll would reliably predict that President Obama will win. However, with an average of these 8 polls, we should be able to conclude with more confidence that based on this data, President Obama is emerging as a definite favorite. However, lately one of my Facebook friends, Chris, introduced me to the fact that most of these polls sample or have in their data set proportionately more Democrats than will be expected to vote on Election Day, November 6th. And Chris showed this graphic, a picture of a plotting of Democratic oversampling and percentage leads for President Obama going up on the dependent variable axis for more to the favor of President Obama. The points plotted from the previous graphic are not from the current up-to-date polls, so I went to find oversampling information on all the current 8 polls. I couldn't find an oversampling for the Rasmussen poll, so I stuck with the 1% on the chart of the first graphic. Also, I couldn't find an oversampling for the Gallup poll, and I heard that Gallup does not oversample Democrat voters, so I show 0 oversampling for the Gallup poll. For the remainder of the polls, I was able to access articles reporting the poll's oversampling of Democrat voters. The data in the table shown here has the most current information I could find today. In order to process this data, I use my ti-nspire graphing calculator pictured here. When we press on, this is what we get. Go to List and Spreadsheets here in the middle at the bottom, and this is our blank spreadsheet. Here is all the data entered into 2 lists on the spreadsheet. Since only 5 rows are visible, we cannot see all 8 here, but they are all here in the spreadsheet. And from here we press Control. Then I add a page. Press I, then add Control I, then add a page, then choose option 5, Data and Statistics. And from here we can press Tab and choose overage on the x-axis and lead on the y-axis. Before we have the calculator find the trend, let's evaluate ourselves. Since the points are quite spread out, I would call this scattering quite a weak correlation. We could draw a trend line from the lower left to upper right like this blue one. This is really a hand-drawn line of best fit. Or even ignoring the 2 points on the left near the origin, we would have a negative trend line like this one. Common sense should disqualify this second trend line, since it alone would mean the less Democrats are sampled, the greater President Obama's lead. In the calculator now, to evaluate, press the menu key. Here is Analysis, option 4. Press 4. This is what we get. Now press option 6, Regression. Here's what we see, the regression menu with all the options. Press enter to choose option 1, linear regression. Here's what we see, the graphed line of regression with the function below. It is somewhat similar to the line of best fit drawn earlier, the one we had in blue going up from lower left to upper right. We see a positively sloping trend line. We also see a y-intercept of about 1.67, meaning that according to this linear regression, taking into account oversampling from all points, President Obama's lead would be about 1.7%. This is an objective analysis taking all 8 points in the data into account. This is where the line crosses the y-axis. The line looks to cross it at about 1.7 or so. This advantage of 1.7 percentage points is down from the 3.3% advantage from the current Real Clear Politics average of polls. However, I ran a correlation coefficient of this regression and it was about 0.37. In the universe of correlation coefficients between 0, which is no correlation, and 1, which is perfect correlation, 0.37 is very weak. Even 0.5 is considered to be quite weak. Is this lesson intended to be an accurate prediction of the upcoming presidential election? Well, not really. There is so much that this simple model, or any two-variable model, does not or cannot take into account. First, as I mentioned, the correlation is quite weak. Secondly, this model doesn't take into account another important factor, which is the undersampling of independent voters, which many say favors Governor Romney, but is not properly represented in the polling samples. And finally, since it's still a little over 6 weeks from Election Day, there are many things that will happen. Will there be increasing Mideast tensions between now and then? Certainly. Will the economy suddenly show marked improvement before Election Day? Perhaps. President Obama and Governor Romney will have 3 debates and the vice presidential candidates 1 debate. Could those debates make a big difference? Certainly. What conclusions can be drawn from this study? First, in spite of our model's limitations, it still tends to confirm that this election right now appears to be very closely contested, and this analysis makes it look even closer. Secondly, related to that, if you favor Governor Romney, you shouldn't be very disheartened by the current polling figures. The analysis brings an already close election even closer. And finally, if you support President Obama, the adjustment for oversampling demonstrates that he would certainly win the election going away if those claiming to favor the president would only get out and vote. So my final request to one and all is to get out and vote this election day. If you are a registered voter, you have the right, privilege, opportunity, and responsibility to get involved by voting. This has been Analyze Polls using Algebra. Thanks for viewing.